life in 3 dimensions got me bent and got me twisted. I know I done said a lot, but I should probably stop pretending. I don't really hold the key and I can't really push a button. I just step up to the mic and try my very best to bust it, but I ran out of breath. It's tight in my chest, my feet just might fail. I can't stand the pressure.
What's going on, Racially Speaking family? Welcome back to where we have real and honest conversations about race as it's viewed through the lenses of faith, family, and vocation. As always, I'm your host, David Phipps, and I'm joined, per usual, by John Mark Walker, a.k.a. the Social Justice Cowboy. John Mark, you like your new nickname?
What's up, everybody? I do. I love the new nickname. It's hilarious. Yeah. Yeah, my Wyatt Walker-ness in there. Love it.
We're starting to establish ourselves enough that we have some inside jokes, so I feel good about that.
Yeah, me too.
So, listeners,
That's
if you're
great.
lost, you just got to go back and see if you can
Listen
find what
to
we're
the
talking
episodes.
about.
Yeah.
You won't have to go back too far yet. I feel like I say I'm always pumped, but I really am. We've been diving into some heavier topics lately, as appropriate, but today, not that we can't go there, of course, but we are joined by some kin. John Mark, your lovely sister, Kara Fritz, is here with us. Kara, thank you so much for being here. Look, I already threw John Mark under the bus for throwing me under the bus, but this is a first for me, actually. I've made John Mark do this several times, but I met Kara moments ago, and usually John Mark's the one that's meeting the guest for the first time. So I'm excited to do this.
That's right.
And also, it's your sister, John Mark. So this will be a cool dynamic. Like I'll ask questions, and then I don't know, maybe we'll have to get you to fill in gaps. I don't know. I don't know if there's going to be.
Yeah, I just hope she doesn't share stories of me growing up.
Right. I was going to say I didn't know if there's going to be any of that. I
There
hope
could be.
Right. I hope the opposite.
Yeah.
Okay, I mentioned more lighthearted today. Kara, you're also known as the Hoppy Black Lady on social media, and we're going to get into that. But then, as I said before, John Mark has said, let's bring her on and have this conversation, and we'll get there. But then he sent me this bio over, and that's at the very bottom. I'm like, well, you didn't tell me there's 101 things that we could also ask her about that fall under all kinds of categories here on the podcast. So I'm going to go into do you justice and read just a few of these things. I'm going to read all of them. Kara, all right, you are 2007 graduate from the College of William and Mary. No big deal, with a bachelor's degree in both history and African American studies, 15 years experience as a youth development professional, almost a decade of full-time youth ministry, managing educational sponsorships for a nonprofit focusing on youth development in Uganda, and also recently managing employment and training programs for youth and young adults with barriers to employment. And then, yes, you're known as the Hoppy Black Lady, in which you share your craft beer experience on social media, writing for local magazines, and advocating for diversity in the craft beverage industry. Love it. So much there. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us here, Kara.
Yeah, thanks for having me today.
Yeah, absolutely. This is going to be fun. Where should we start, John Mark?
Yeah. Well, I thought it would be just cool to hear some of your experience, your life experience, your cultural journey, if you will. So if you want to share, I think starting with, let's see, describe how you grew up. I mean, I know, but for the people that don't.
I was going to say, is it weird for you to ask that? Should I ask it? But anyway, you already did.
I don't think so. Yeah, I'll let David ask the questions, but I'll start with this first one. Because we grew up in the same house. So, but I'm really curious. I don't think we've ever really had this conversation about how you would describe our childhood, right? So just kind of how did you grow up? How did you see it? And then I'll bounce the rest of the questions. Let David drive this ship too. So go ahead.
So Kara, This is the perfect opportunity to just start making up stories and see if John Mark's listening.
That's I'm not paying attention. Yeah. I'll call you out if it's not true. Go ahead.
Well, so I grew up with a younger brother who's about 2 years younger than me, who my parents wouldn't take back to the hospital after I got tired of him after about 2 weeks of his existence. I asked and they said no, and that we had to keep him. So I am grateful that mom and dad did not send John Mark back to the hospital. But he did kind of rock my world. I went from being the only one to having to share the attention of our wonderful parents, but I'm really grateful for John Mark as my brother. That's all the John Mark stories I think I've got for you today. I'll be nice and save the rest of them.
That. Thank you. When we invite you back, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'll save them for the next time. So grew up in loving households, African-American parents, in a variety of kind of diverse cultural communities. I think our formative years, we were exposed. I'm grateful for exposure to a lot of different cultures and perspectives. And so our parents were in campus ministry. So as a child, I remember having students from all over the country who had different backgrounds, and then from all over the world who had different experiences kind of being in and out of our house. And so I feel like I, from an early age, understood that there was a lot of beautiful diversity in culture and ethnicity in the world around us. It wasn't something that someone specifically pointed out to me, but I feel like I just always knew that there's a lot of diversity, people made in God's image, who looked a lot of different ways, ate a lot of different foods, believed a lot of different things, valued a lot of different things. So a pretty culturally rich childhood, I would describe it.
Remind me where you guys grew up. Was it Richmond or Northern Virginia? Or was it either one?
So when people ask me where I grew up, neither of those are the answer that I give. We were actually both born in Columbus, Ohio, and then we moved to Kalamazoo, Michigan, and lived in Kalamazoo for about 8 years. So I was 11 when we moved from Kalamazoo to North Carolina. So when I think childhood and where did I grow up, I'm thinking Kalamazoo, Michigan. So like southwestern Michigan.
I don't think
which is different for me. I would say Northern Virginia is where I grew up, even though I moved there when I was 10.
Okay.
10, right? And and you were 13, 14?
Yeah, I was 13, 14.
So, yeah. So even though I spent 8 years in Michigan, I don't really identify with Michigan.
I was going to say, I don't even think I knew the Michigan part. John Mark, holding out, man.
Yeah. And there's a little bit of time. There's a little bit of time in North Carolina, in
couple years in
Michigan and Virginia.
Yeah.
Okay, where about North Carolina?
We were in Raleigh.
Okay. So you kind of covered this already, so it might have been more of a fluid thing, but when would you say, Kara, that you became aware of the racial complexities of your world?
Yeah, so complexities, I'm not sure. I think I became aware that other people might not value that cultural diversity when I was in the 5th grade, when this was like right after we had moved to North Carolina. And we were at the state fair, and we're walking through the state fairgrounds, and there's, we're in this big exhibit hall, and we're looking at the different booths, and there's different sorts of things. And I see out of the corner of my eye this flag that I had never seen before. It's red, white, and blue. It's got some stars on it. And I'm like, ooh, what is this? And I've always been a curious person, kind of wanted to learn and kind of search things out. So I wander over to this table full of this, red, white, and blue flag. That's not the American flag, but surely it must be patriotic because it's got, the American colors on it. And I distinctly remember just the hatred in the eyes of the people at that booth, who just looked at me, and I was like, oh, I don't belong here. And then I heard my dad call my name, and there was this, just the tone of Kara, get over here, right now. And I was I was so confused by the response of the people hanging out with the Confederate flag, paraphernalia. And then my dad's, hey, come over here. Right. and, having to have a conversation with him in the exhibit hall of the state fairgrounds, right? With like cotton candy in one hand, and here's this, racism that's presented, and my father having to explain to me, like, this is a different situation, and there are people out here who don't value the diversity that God has created. So that was kind of a pivotal moment for me. And there's some things in life that I'm going to have to figure out how to navigate because of the color of my skin.
Not valuing it is a very nice way of putting it.
It is.
So it sounds like you had a conversation. What was the conversation with your dad like after he, told you to come away from the table?
Yeah, I mean, it was him kind of explaining, and it was not a super deep conversation then and there in that moment, right? But it was hey, that flag represents, one, I do distinctly remember him telling me that it's actually the battle flag of the Army of Northern Virginia that these people have co-opted, right? To have.
He told you that then?
He did. He told me that then.
10 years after that to learn that. Yeah.
But we had this real brief conversation about the Civil War, and then racism and its kind of legacy in America, and then just say, hey, when you see that flag, be cautious and be wary of what you are entering into. And there were later conversations about race. That moment was not the one. There was a 3-year-old brother to chase around the fair. Plus John Mark, got to keep him out of trouble too.
Yeah.
That is interesting. I don't remember that. I was pretty oblivious when I'd grown up as a kid. I just kind of went along with the family. But it strikes me that at state fairs today, that booth still exists, right? So your experience might not be unique. Other Black children could wander up to similar booths at every state fair USA. I recently went to one in Virginia, and there was a booth with the Confederate flag all over it too, along with other slogans and the flags, the "Don't Tread on Me" and everything like that. And then my family goes to North Carolina. I mean, we still have relatives there, and so the state fair is still something that my wife's side of the family will go to together. And I don't remember seeing that flag there, but if it was in Virginia, I highly doubt that they have removed that booth from the North Carolina State Fair in Raleigh.
For
today.
sure. For sure, no.
So however long ago, I'm not going to age you, but the 15 years ago that it was, where you were.
Well, that's considerate. That's kind.
Where you were there, in 5th grade. It hasn't changed that long in all this time. So I think that's just worth observing. Yeah.
Yes.
It's interesting that so little has changed, and that some of those same conversations are still being had, over and over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm trying not to take a dark turn, but it is, I hate how similar, how interconnected all this is to, as we're recording this, John Mark and I just did, a special, it's not a good word, but bonus episode where we discussed this past week, mainly the shooting in Buffalo and then Dallas and then Laguna Woods in California, the racially charged shootings, and all this is just so interconnected. Even Kara, you sharing your experience as a young girl, having that experience when you're just out with your family trying to have fun, you should be able to remain ignorant, I would say. You shouldn't have to have that conversation, but it was out of necessity that you needed to have it with your parents. And then I just go to the Buffalo shooter was an 18-year-old. And so I pull that out as an example to people when they say, let's leave this stuff in the past. It's like this is essentially a child, just barely not, I guess, technically 18, who's obviously been groomed and inspired and mentored and discipled in this way of thinking. So it's clearly not dead. But anyway, I appreciate you sharing that. That's, helpful, not just for this conversation, but in general. Moving along in your timeline. So as I mentioned, you this is obviously why you were in Virginia. You ended up going to William and Mary. I'd love to ask a little bit about your experience there. Not a super diverse setting either. Very highly academic setting. Great school in Virginia, in colonial Williamsburg, essentially, which is another funny element. So can you I know that's a broad question, but the, tension there, even just ask that question, is palpable. I think of what was your experience like, and what made you even comfortable feeling like that's where you wanted to go to study the things you studied.
Yeah.
History, African American studies specifically, I think, was it what you studied?
Yeah, it was. William and Mary was great. Loved my experience. It was not where I wanted to be. So kind of growing up, I wanted to go to a historically Black college university. Those were kind of my top schools. I got into my dream school and had scholarship offers to some other HBCUs. But William and Mary ended up being the best financial choice. And I knew that it was a, excellent educational opportunity. So I had really wanted to go to an HBCU because I wanted that sense of community that comes with being with people who looked like me, with an educational experience designed for people who look like me. And then just the social and personal formation that happens in college, with that being designed for people who look like me and experience life in the world from that same perspective. That had been really what I had wanted from my college experience. I felt like that would be a safe place to land, a little bit of an opportunity to just be challenged academically, get a great education, but to be loved on and nurtured as a person, right? In a place where they value the fact that I was an African-American woman. So that was what I wanted. It ended up not being what I got. But I still found that same kind of sense of community at William and Mary, in relationships and organizations with other African-American students, being involved in, the Black Student Union and the gospel choir. And I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, which is a all Black sorority focused on service to the community. And so finding those places where I could kind of get what I had been hoping to have in terms of the relationship was really important for me. Having that community of people that were here at this primarily white institution with me and experiencing that the same way, right? So, having other Black kids in my history class when my professor told me that I was there because of affirmative action. Having other Black kids on campus when the conservative Republican club on campus decided to do a reverse affirmative action kind of bake sale, right? Where stuff was cheaper if you were a minority. And there was this game of, they called it Ghettopoly. So there was all of these, there were things that happened on campus, right? Wow. Where, but having a community that was there to deal with that nonsense with me, while dealing with the rigorous academic pressures of William and Mary was really important to me.
Okay. Great. When stuff like that would happen, did you feel like you were cared for by, I don't know, not just the other Black students and your friends, but I don't know, did any allies come out of the woodwork? The administration, other, white students?
Yeah. So particularly that bake sale, there was a good bit of campus outrage and kind of conversations and discussions. And then our Office for Multicultural Students, I can't remember exactly what they called that office, but that was really was a safe space for students, minority students of kind of any ethnicity. And so having that kind of safe space, having access to the staff that worked there, we probably had lunch 15, 20 people piled in this little office, hanging out with our, director who was in charge of those sorts of things multiple times a week. And so having that space, having their support from kind of an administrative level was really helpful for engaging us in the conversations we needed to be cared for, but then also helping us figure out how to engage the campus in those conversations and really letting those be student-led, student-driven conversations.
Okay. Yeah. I'm putting you on the spot. So like, do you have an example of something where you directly like had to communicate or pursued communicating with like the administration, the president of the university, like saying like this, we can't accept this anymore?
No.
Okay. Yeah. I was just wondering because I know. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think there's a different level of activism, might not be the word I want to use, but I think that from when I was in school, however many years ago that was, 15 plus years ago, we were having those conversations a little bit differently, I think, than students are having them now on college campuses.
Gotcha.
The tensions weren't as high. Things didn't get blown up as much. So then you could have conversations, like you as students could have conversations with the conservative club. Whereas today, I don't think there are those lines of communications. So you could go up and say, this is why this is offensive to people. But today, I'm not sure that would be received or heard in a similar way. And same thing, I think, with administration. They were open to hearing things and able to be open. It's like, oh, we didn't know if you were to bring those things. Whereas today, I'm not sure. I feel like public relations would have to get involved, and it could be this blow up thing. So, yeah. So
I was going to say, I would think that I'll disagree with you on that a little bit. And that I think that administrations are more sensitive now and would be more responsive now and would be out in front of those sorts of things a little bit more now. And maybe it's that PR angle. But I think in the last 15 or so years, at least looking at what has happened at William and Mary, they've been really intentional with highlighting some of those things, with creating offices that are forming those conversations, that are making sure it's an inclusive community, and those things are addressed from an administrative level where they might not have been when I was in school.
School. Okay.
Right. So that's a great dynamic, even where we might have disagreed. I was thinking, do we think that we're in a better spot if we're painting with broad strokes for a second? Like, because we're kind of bristling at some of the instances you shared, like the bake sale and stuff like that, or like half off if you're a person of color, whatever you said that, something crazy. But I think like it's easy to kind of bristle at that and be like, oh, that's the worst. But times are different. So I'd say now I would agree that maybe something like that wouldn't happen now. But is that a good thing in a sense of, like you mentioned, PR, like from an administration? Like, do you think that comes from a good place overall? Or is it maybe more in the side of, well, it's PR, everyone cares about diversity, we got to nip this in the bud and get ahead of it, versus actually caring about it and being able to have conversation? Because I get it, like, even like John Mark said, maybe back then things may have been quote unquote worse, but there wasn't such a heightened tension like there is right now. Maybe there was. I don't remember it being quite the same.
Yeah. I think my hope is that it would be genuine, that it's a genuine response and genuine conversations. And you can't not be genuine and not be authentic and have sustained work or progress. So
that's true.
So my hope would be that it's genuine.
Yeah. I have a couple other questions about
that.
Go ahead.
I like how you said that you can't not be genuine and have sustained progress. I think that's very well said.
That's great.
And true. If you truly care, you're continuing the work. If you don't care, it'll come out. And especially people of color, especially Black people, will see that the administration doesn't actually care. So I think that's well said.
Yeah. I thought of two things. We've had a couple people come on here and kind of talk about college experiences and education. Did you have any professors who were people of color?
I did.
Okay. So what was that like? Did that stick out to you as impactful? I'm assuming it did, but were they like, who was teaching you most of your courses in African American studies and history?
Yeah. So most of my courses in African American studies were taught by people of African descent, right? They might not have been African American, but they were somewhere from the African diaspora. And a good number of my like history classes were taught by people of color as well. I mean, I had to take like a kind of general history of Asian countries, and I had an Asian gentleman who taught that class.
Oh, wow.
And there were African American professors. My dance instructor was an Asian woman. So, I had
William and
Middle
Mary.
Eastern folks as professors. And so it was a really, really very diverse faculty.
That's fantastic.
That I had opportunity to take classes from.
That's great. I like to ask because and I'm not implying that, a white professor couldn't teach, African American studies or history. Probably I would just wonder if you could have compared the experiences of what that was like. But and
I did have white professors that taught African American, history courses, and yeah.
So what was that like? Did you? And I'm not trying to like go after something that's not there, but was that comparatively?
It was awesome.
Okay, great.
It was awesome. And so like my advisor and probably my favorite professor at William & Mary is a well-known scholar, and he's a white guy who his research has focused on various historical things related to African Americans, particularly in the state of Virginia. And he did a really good job with his scholarship. I think super respectful, really challenged the way that I thought was really influential.
Love it.
It's neat. That's neat. Yeah.
Awesome.
So William & Mary, Williamsburg. Do you remember early experience as a family in Williamsburg?
I think I know where
I'm going with this. We were kids, right? And we were in Colonial Williamsburg, and we were on a tour, and people are dressed in their colonial garb, and there was one character, and who? Tell us about the character that I'm thinking right now.
They do not do this tour anymore. So we can talk about Colonial Williamsburg's evolution.
I'm bracing myself.
But
that's good.
It was a tour that was designed to highlight the experience of Black people in Colonial Williamsburg, and what one of the things that you could do through the course of the day was follow this runaway slave around Colonial Williamsburg.
I heard about this.
As he tried to escape. So we spent the day in Colonial Williamsburg chasing this runaway slave in between houses and through gardens, right? And it's just this pack of people, this pack of tourists, and he's like, be quiet. We can't get caught. We have to go back here. And so yeah, that was a thing. That was a thing that we did.
Just a Black dude from Newport News dressed up as a slave in Williamsburg.
a thing we did in like the mid 90s.
Summer internship for that guy.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's wild. It's wild. But
I don't know.
That's Williamsburg. That's experience.
I don't know if it was that exact same story, but I heard something like that take place recently. I think it was at the secondary education level. I hope it was the same story because I hope there's not a bunch of those stories running around. I'm sure there are, but oh my gosh.
Colonial Williamsburg is not doing that anymore.
Yes, no, that's not a feature anymore. Yeah, which I appreciate that they have stopped doing that. Yeah, so.
Oh goodness.
Yeah. I appreciate the effort, and I also appreciate that they've stopped it.
The effort. So, like, you think there was maybe even some good intention behind it?
Oh, I do think there was good intention behind it. I remember thinking this is a weird way to do this and a weird thing to do, but I do think there was good intention behind it, clumsily executed, I think. But I think the intent or idea of what's a way for us to, an interactive way for us to expose families to this idea that there were people who resisted slavery by running away, right? There's all sorts of methods of resistance that happen within slave communities. And that's not, we could have a whole conversation just about that. But that they tried in a family-friendly, engaging way to talk about that issue. I think the intent was good. Okay. I think the execution, not so hot. It wouldn't fly today. But I think mid-90s, it was decent attempt at that conversation.
I agree.
Okay.
It was an earnest attempt to include an important story to tell. It was just kind of awkwardly executed. So I think I agree with the good intent, but I think it's true in a lot of conversations about race, diversity, equity, and inclusion that sometimes our intent is good, but the way that we do things, the method that we do, there can be awkwardness, weirdness, sometimes inappropriateness in trying to get to a good end goal. So I feel like this, I had fun as a kid. I had fun seeing this dude run around in his costume. So, but now I look back and I'm like, that's a little weird. So,
Oh man. All right, last question on this. I live in a small college town as well, smaller than Williamsburg. But did you find yourself feeling like you wanted to stick to campus for the community and I guess feeling safer versus going off, not just to Colonial Williamsburg, but out in the towny areas? Because I know I've talked to a good amount of students or students of color here at the university that I work at, and it's, really like night and day how diverse and welcoming ethnically and racially that the campus is versus the town. So I was just wondering if you had a similar experience or not.
So when we left campus, we left Williamsburg, but not because we weren't welcome from, a racial standpoint, but because Williamsburg was super boring and there was nothing else to do. And so it just was not, when I was in school, there were not a lot of other things to do outside of what was happening on campus.
Gotcha. Mm-hmm. I guess that wasn't peak Busch Gardens, Water Country USA, or
Times. It was there. I would go once a semester. They would give students super discounted tickets, and we would go then. But that's not. You can only ride the Loch Ness Monster so many times.
Yeah.
Right, John?
For sure. Yeah. 10, I think 10 is the limit. 10 times.
I'm from Norfolk, so I know about the summer pass that we got every year. And, Yep.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a quick break, and we'll come back and talk about the other hats you wear.
Okay.
All right, let's take off our academia hats and put on our craft beer beverage industry hats. Does that sound good?
Let's do it.
As we said at the beginning, you're known on social media as the Hoppy Black Lady, and I actually don't have a good pulse on what our listeners will know and how in they are with this industry. So even saying Hoppy Black Lady, we might need to even explain what that even means. So Kara, how did you are a craft beer connoisseur. How did you get into this space? I'll ask that first. How did you get into this space?
Yeah. So, the first time that I really started, or how I started drinking craft beer, was actually through an Advent beer calendar. I have a friend who's an Anglican, who works in the Anglican church, and he sometime along the way, started putting together a box of beers, like one beer to drink every day for Advent, and paired it with a C.S. Lewis devotional on Advent. And so, he was like, hey, I've got a couple extra boxes. Like, need a couple more people to join. Are you interested? And I was like, sure, why not? I'll try something new. So that's how I first started really drinking craft beer and kind of exploring it and going, oh, I like this. I don't like that at all. Or I want to learn more about this or have more of this style of beer. It's all because I was celebrating Advent.
Wow.
And C.S. Lewis.
And C.S.
Lewis, yeah.
All right, so let's back up
That's
again to explain for everyone listening, what is a craft beer specifically, and then what does even Hoppy Black Lady mean?
Okay, yeah, so craft beer is, like, a craft brewery is independently owned, as opposed to one that's like a huge corporation or is owned by a huge corporation. And so just the independent ownership is the key thing for that, craft beer space. It's not like Budweiser or Anheuser-Busch or, InBev, some of these big corporations, independently owned. And then most of them are producing on a much smaller scale. The amount of beer that they make is way less than what you're going to get from some of those bigger corporations. And what was the other question?
Just even explaining your social media handle. And I'm speaking, I don't know very much at all, but I know more. I'm trying to think partly through like the eyes of my my wife, who knows absolutely zero about like beer. So I would say,
okay. Yeah.
I think I told her we're having you on, and she was like, "I'll look her up, Happy Black Lady." I was like, "No, Hoppy." And so
what's hops?
Yeah, what is that?
Hops is something that's in beer, right?
Yeah. So when you make beer, basically what you need to make beer is you need water, you need some sort of grain, and you need hops and yeast. And so those are the ingredients. And the hops and the grain as well, and the yeast to some extent. I'm not going to get too like super scientific on you, but give a beer its different kind of flavor, or different styles of beer require different ratios of all of those different ingredients. And I am the Hoppy Black Lady, Hoppy, because hops are an ingredient in beer, and my favorite styles of beer are a little bit heavier on that like hop flavor as opposed to a malty flavor. And so that's where Hoppy Black Lady comes from.
So
nice. What are your favorite styles?
Yeah. So I love a good IPA. So an India Pale Ale, and they really tend to feature those hops. And there's all sorts of different. I mean, you can have hops that taste like an evergreen tree, like pine needles. There's hops that taste real citrusy. I've been really enjoying lately some hops coming out of like Australia and Africa that kind of have a little bit of a different taste to them. But you can do a lot. There's a lot of opportunity for creativity within the IPA style of beer, but that's my favorite style.
Yeah, I hear my friends bring up the hops every once in a while when I'll have a beer with one of them, and I hate to admit, but I'm not an IPA person. I don't know a lot about the craft beer scene, but I don't know. What are the other types? I mean, I think I like lagers, and again, I don't know very much about the difference. So like,
yeah, that's all I know too.
IPAs are heavy.
IPAs and lagers, that's it.
Are heavier with hops, right? IPAs are?
Yeah.
Okay.
They can be heavier with hops, right?
Okay.
You can put hops, you can have a hoppy lager. I actually helped brew a hoppy lager a couple years ago. So, but yes, lagers don't typically have that hop forward flavor. There's hops in a lager, but they're not that hop forward flavor.
Okay.
Interesting.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I mean, like overall, you touched on how you got into the scene. My question, John Mark helped come up with this, or since you came up with it. But so like, what is it like being a Black woman in a white millennial bearded male hobby? I love that phrase, John Mark. Shout out to all my friends that fit that demographic.
I just picture the guy who's into beer is just wearing flannel and just has this beard, right? And I may be totally wrong, but that's what I pictured, right? This kind of city hipster wannabe mountain man guy. And so I was just, what is it like being Hoppy Black Lady in that space?
Yeah, there are a lot of those guys in craft beer, and there are a lot who aren't. And one of the reasons that I started, Hoppy Black Lady was specifically because of that perception and idea, right? That, you think, okay, I have to be like a bearded dude who wears flannel to even be in craft breweries. And I had for years, after I started drinking beer from that Advent beer calendar, started, going, okay, well, where can I get more of this? Like, can I, so I started visiting craft breweries and drinking beer and figuring out what I liked and what I didn't like. And, my husband, independent of me, and me independent of him, really enjoys doing that as well. Right. And so it's become a thing that we can do together, and go and visit breweries and we've been doing it. And, as we travel for either his work or for mine, or just going to visit family, it's kind of always like, all right, well, let's look up breweries on Google and see kind of where can we stop along the way? What new can we find? And, we're doing it, and we are often the only people of color, in a space. When we go to a craft brewery, within like 15, 20 seconds, we can tell you how many other people of color there are in the room. And it's not even just like a conscious, hey, let me count, but, just an awareness of our surroundings. And, so Hoppy Black Lady came about from just some conversations that we were having, and we're like, hey, we have this experience in this community that's different, and wanting to kind of highlight there are different people who are part of the craft beer community, right? Other than bearded white dude wearing flannel, right? There are Black people, there are Black women who enjoy craft beer, who know a little bit about, what I'm doing when I'm ordering a beer and what I'm drinking. Okay. And so it was just kind of like, all right, we're doing this. We do some cool travels. At this point, I've been to over 360 craft breweries in 18 states. And so it was like, when we started, when I started doing Hoppy Black Lady, it was like probably over 150 in like maybe 8 or 9 states. And so it was like, okay, this is kind of a cool thing, kind of a unique thing. Let's take some pictures of what I'm already doing and where I'm already going, and highlight stories and experiences and see what happens along the way.
So you said, what's the timeline? So you mentioned going into this because of the perception, or maybe even real reality, that there were not very many men and women of color in the industry. And you mentioned that there are. Do you mean like there already were people in the industry, like professionally, that people that we just don't know about, or that there were a lot that wanted to be in it that have, for whatever reason, not been able to get in because of, I think, marginalization? Both.
I think both.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you already, like, because you talked about kind of your origin story, but did you already know that like there were plenty of other friends that shared the exact same desire as you did for the space? Yeah.
So it's having the Hoppy Black Lady, doing that whole thing has really introduced me to a really cool community of like-minded people who are, people of color who love craft beer, want to see more people of color enjoy this, this community and enjoy craft beer, and just kind of want to highlight that diversity. So I've been able to make some really good friends who are also like-minded, who are all around the country. People who own, Black folks who own their own breweries, or other Black people who are using social media as a tool to educate Black folks who work in breweries. It's been pretty cool.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Awesome. Yeah, I wanted to ask if there were Black-owned breweries that you encountered. So
Yeah, there are.
That's neat. Yeah.
So there's this really cool beer festival that happens annually in Pittsburgh, and the festival is called it's called Barrel and Flow. That's not its original name, but it's currently called Barrel and Flow, and it got to go in 2019 for the first time to this festival. And to be there, you either have to be a Black-owned brewery or you have to be a brewery that partners with a Black person in your local community to collaborate and make a beer like for the festival. And there were probably at that festival, there were probably maybe 15 or so like Black-owned breweries that were there from all over the country. And it was really cool to connect with them.
That's neat.
And, that number has grown. And it really felt like a family reunion. It was primarily Black folks in attendance at this beer festival, and kind of I had already had the social media presence prior to, and I remember walking in and having somebody, I was like 10 feet in, and they were like, "It's Hoppy Black Lady," and they were, and it felt like such like a family reunion and a really cool space to enjoy craft beer in.
So
That's
cool.
neat.
Have you found yourself carving out more of a space for the Black community in the space, or have you also tried to collaborate with the white community or the predominant culture?
Yeah, I think both, right?
Okay.
So, I am wanting to highlight, I'm really just sharing my craft beer travels and, highlighting stories and people that I meet along the way. I want to do that. I want to highlight and elevate Black voices. I want to have conversations and do have conversations with breweries about, why aren't there more Black people here in your spaces? And then saying to other Black folk, hey, come, this is cool stuff, right? Like they're making some good things. It might be a little bit of a different environment, but it's an opportunity to interact with people who are doing cool things. They might not look like you, they might not think like you, but I've found a real sense of community.
So cool. Do you find, I'm just thinking this, the things I read on your bio, does this combine with your work and desire to advocate for the marginalized with unemployment overall?
A little bit, but not a ton.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is more fun hobby, disconnected from work.
Yeah.
I mean, I see the connection in caring for people and wanting to help make a space for people in the beer scene that wouldn't have a space. But then also I see the connection helping develop students too. So just a trailblazer, right? I also, speaking of connections, your story about going to the state fair and seeing that booth, it makes me think of you and your husband driving around to some of these breweries they're not in cities, right? They're kind of off the beaten path. Some of them are, take a left turn past the historically inaccurate Confederate flag, keep going past the wedding venue that used to be a plantation, and boom, you're at this brewery. So to me, those are spaces where I'm like, I don't know if I want to travel. Like, here, everybody, this is my location. Follow me. Make sure I make it out of there. So part of me sees the curious child in you that went up to that booth. Right now, you're a little more informed about what you might be facing, but you're still brave, and you're going out to these spaces and meeting people who you don't know how they're going to receive you. So I don't know if there's much of a question in there, but I guess the question is your reception. When you and your husband walk into these breweries, how are you received? Maybe not like by the people and then by the people who run it, just by the patrons and by the staff. How are you received?
Is your husband Black?
Yeah.
Yes.
Husband Black. Okay.
Yeah. Some of the warmest receptions we've received in breweries have been in places like what you just described, where you would think, oh, I need to be a little bit wary about my surroundings, right? Where they are like on the side of a mountain, like deep back in the woods. And I'm like, all right, what's the deal here? And they've been some of the warmest, most welcoming receptions.
Wow.
Overall, it's an overwhelming, people are glad to have you there. I think the craft brewery community in general, going to craft breweries, one of the things I love about it is that they are welcoming spaces and that they are community spaces, right? And we rarely go, to a brewery where I'm not making a new friend or having a conversation with someone that I've, never met before or might not just talk to, just kind of walking down the street. So there've been a couple of instances where it's like, might not be super welcome here. And so, have my flight and I'll get out of here. But overwhelmingly, it's been good. A lot of times we'll have conversations with like the manager or the owner, and they'll, be like, hey, how'd you find us? And we know that it's like hey, there's Black people in here and we don't normally see Black people, but we want to see more Black people. So what do we do to get you here so that we can do it more or so that you can bring your friends?
Right.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Do you have
advertise on BET, right? That's the answer.
Yeah.
We should put commercial out.
We'll give you a free advertising spot on the podcast. You'll get dozens of followers. Do you have is there an end goal, or maybe not end goal, but do you have any few goals right now with what you're doing with Hoppy Black Lady and doing the craft beer reviews and stuff? Or do you find yourself more just content in doing what you're doing? I don't mean you should have goals. I just mean, like, do you have based on what we're even talking about, asking, like, is there 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road, you want to see, like, I don't know, open your own brewery or something like that?
Brewery? Yeah.
I don't think I get that question a lot. I don't know that I would open a brewery.
Okay.
Brewing is hard work, and I'm not sure that I want to take that leap. But maybe a bottle shop one day down the road, right, where I can kind of curate the selection of beer that's available for people to buy.
Oh, wow.
That's cool.
That could be cool. Owning a bottle shop. But no, I'm not going to open my own brewery. So just in terms of goals, right? So the whole thing has happened pretty organically. And, just taking pictures of what I was already doing, having conversations with folks, which I was already doing, and sharing those things. And it's given me opportunity to develop relationships, like with the State Brewers Association. I do a lot of things with the Brewers Association in the state where I live. And, they've had me on podcasts and on panels to talk about diversity in the craft beverage industry and what my experience has been like. Had opportunities to go to some really cool events and get to have conversations with, brewers and managers about, the experience of a Black person, in these types of spaces, but then also, conversations around, so breweries often, right, you want cheap space. And a lot of times, breweries are kind of on the cutting edge or the leading edge of gentrification in a community.
Right, that makes sense.
And breweries don't always do a really good job of relationships with the existing residents of the community, as they come in and do something that's very different than what is happening around them. So I've had some conversations with breweries who, and it makes sense, right? They go where it is affordable for you to open your business. But they want to do a good job of being part of the community that they've inserted themselves into, right? And so conversations with them, I've had some cool conversations around how do we do that? How do we be a good neighbor? How do we build our business? But at the same time, develop good relationships with the people who are already here. How do we invite them into our space? How do we encourage, the things, meet the needs of the community that's around us? So continuing to be able to have conversations like that, to talk about being a woman in this community, being a Black person in this community. What does it look like to engage well with the people who are around us? So I think just continuing to have that opportunity, started to do some writing in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the writing part.
Yeah, and so continuing to get to do that would be awesome. Yeah.
What's the name of the magazine that you write for typically?
So I write for a magazine that's called Maryland Road Trips. And I write about beer and breweries throughout the state of Maryland. So that's been cool. It's been fun. Hope, would love to continue to get to do that, right? Because it's telling people stories, talking about the breweries and why they opened and why people should go visit. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Before we let you go, you mentioned even just the conversations that you were already having before you kind of entered into the space and that you've continued to have. As a conversational space that we have here with on Racially Speaking, I just had to ask, have you seen fruit from those conversations as, kind of the one of the only people of color, especially women of color in the industry, typically when they come to you and ask you, you said been on panels and podcasts and stuff, would you say that you've seen, whether you can trace it back to yourself or not, have you seen a shift at all with diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I have. I think overall, like I said, the craft beer industry is welcoming and wants to be inclusive. And, there are some places, right, just like in anywhere, there are people who are like, whatever, I don't need to invest my time here. But overall, I think there is a desire to, people love what they do, right? It's hard work. If you are a craft brewer, if you own a brewery, if you work in that space and that hospitality space, it's hard work and you're passionate about what you're doing and you want to share what you're passionate about, right? You want other people to enjoy it and they want people to come in. And so I think there is a genuine desire to, okay, how can I continue to increase the comfort level for different people to come enjoy, what this thing is that I'm passionate about? How can I share what I love with more people? And so I do think that there's a genuine, response towards, let's see what we need to do to be, what do we need to do differently to be more inclusive?
So cool.
That's neat. Yeah.
Wow, I knew I would, but I've learned so much, way beyond beer. John Mark, do you have any last thoughts or questions for your sister?
No, I'm just glad you came on. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for being Hoppy Black Lady, and thanks for all the beers that you've bought me at breweries.
You're welcome.
Kara, is there anything we could promote on social media or on this episode even that listeners can support you by?
Yeah. If folks want to follow along in what I'm doing and where I'm drinking, Hoppy Black Lady on Instagram, Definitely. Twitter, and Facebook. Would love to connect with people and have conversations there. Yeah.
Awesome.
Where's the next beer festival that you'll be at? Do you know? Yeah. You got that on the books?
The next beer festival will probably be... Yeah, so I'm going to there's a new brewery opening about 10 minutes from my house tomorrow. So planning on heading there. And then we'll definitely be at Barrel and Flow, that black beer festival that I was talking about. That's in Pittsburgh. We'll be there this summer.
So fun. Nice.
I need to get you to come through the New River Valley. We have a brewery that literally is 10 feet away from my house down the street. Oh yeah, John Mark, we went there for a second. I don't know if
we took me there. We got tacos there. Yeah.
We got tacos there because the food trucks go there, but you got to come through.
Yeah, I'm up for it.
Awesome. We'll have to arrange that. All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on here, Kara. This was awesome. I learned a ton, as I said, about beer and beyond. Listeners, thank you so much for listening. As always, the music you're listening to was done by our good friend Dylan Dent, and our artwork was created by the also great Ashley Bush. And we'll see you guys next time.
The nightmare might scare you no worse than reality. They hunt you by day, R.I.P. Ahmaud Arbery. Everybody got a time, but that's less than comforting. I hope I'm alive by the time they choose to comfort me. Mosquitoes in the vein, or leeches on my soul. This money on my mind is a fracture in my bones. You get crippled by continuing existence like a ghost. And they wonder why we drink, and they wonder why we smoke, and they wonder why we think that everything's a joke. I'm shocked that we can sleep, must be the thought of letting go. Now I lay me down to sleep, I'm better with the valley. Now I lay me down to sleep, I'm better with the valley.